Hello once again, I'm Kevin Turner from Real Estate Talk and welcome to this special broadcast for Australian Property Investor. Satellite cities is what we're talking about. There's an article in the API called Satellites We Love. Satellite cities or satellite centres are proving very popular with investors. According to Ali Hummoud, who is my next guest, a director at Plan Zone Consulting, he says that while satellites are close to their capital city CBDs, they also operate quite independently. Hi Ali, thanks for your time.
Hi Kevin, thanks for having me.
What are the big property investment ticks that satellite centres get from you? What makes them stand out as an investment category?
Well, I mean, traditionally the CBD of the city is the place where people want to be. They want to live there, they want to work there, they want to have their recreational needs there or play there, as we say. So it's a place where people want to live, work, and play. But for a lot of cities, the actual CBD is out of reach either because of its affordability or its location or lack of housing. So satellite cities generally, from my perspective, they're a city that's outside of the main CBD of an area, and they can, as you say, operate independently, as the story says. You know, they've got their ability to function as an entity on their own. But in most cases, they do rely on some support or function of the main CBD. So the ticks that I see from an investment perspective when you find a satellite city is the convenience. So they're generally a convenient location offering those three aspects that I spoke of earlier, the live, the work, and the play, at a more accessible and affordable aspect in most cases. So they're usually attractive to renters, and so it's quite easy to find tenants for an investor from an investor's perspective. They're close to a variety of services, business services, retail services. They've got shopping centres. There's employment opportunities nearby. And they're also hubs that have good and really reliable connections to transport, high frequency transport, lots of modes of transport in most cases. So traditionally, when you look at the setup of the transport system, it's focused around a city or a centre, and everyone's trying to get into that city and that centre. So equally, being in that city and that centre, you've got access to everything else as well. So they're the biggest ticks I would suggest.
Yeah. So what defines a good satellite city? I mean, you've given us some great characteristics there, but what do you think defines one?
Look, I think a strong and successful main capital city is needed for a satellite city to get a tick and to be successful. You need that functioning, self-sufficient main city to then generate the demand for a satellite city to occur. So a main capital city is always key. There's always a main capital city in all cases, and hence why we get to the satellite cities that start emerging. Strong population growth, big populations to generate the demand that's needed for the services, the housing, all those employment opportunities that are coming up, the increased infrastructure and transport services. Good access to transport is one of the keys and what defines a good satellite city. Having that, like I mentioned earlier, the different modes of transport, train, bus, tram, light rail, cycling paths, pedestrian walkways, ways for people to get around in various ways, and ways for people to connect as well through those various means. That's one of the key criteria, I think, in defining a satellite city. It needs to be accessible and needs to have access to other areas. And also an established identity. So over time, small areas or cities, they start gaining a reputation, they start building up their presence, and they slowly emerge into these satellite cities. It's rare that they're planned and they are created overnight. They do take time, but an identity of their own. So they can function as an entity on their own, like I suggest, and not rely heavily on a supporting function of a main city or CBD.
Of course, we've seen no more successful city than Sydney in recent times with some massive prices, and I want to focus, if I could, on that area because I think it's a good example there for us. But do you think that this is the future for investors who feel that they may have missed the boom in Sydney?
Look, I think so. I think the housing market in Sydney is a great example of where a satellite city gets its fuel from and how they succeed. The housing market in terms of land and detached properties and just having a home is slowly getting out of reach, I guess, for a lot of investors. The entry point is raised quite high, so return on investment is starting to deteriorate. And it's starting to, I guess, people are starting to look at other ways to invest. So whether they start looking at their own properties or investing in a different type of housing, that's where I guess the shift is at the moment. And in Sydney's case, the housing supply in Sydney is changing. It's seeing a shift to more high density living around these transport hubs, around satellite cities like we're talking about. And there's plenty of supply for investors. Like I said earlier, one of the big ticks is that they're very attractive to tenants. And so owners of these properties won't have a big issue in trying to find tenants or get an income from their investments in these satellite city areas. So the entry level, I guess, in a satellite city is, when you're looking at the type of housing, is generally lower than what you would expect to pay for a house and land package or even an established home in other parts of Sydney. So you'd be looking at typically buying a unit, for example, in a satellite city, which should easily be about half the cost of what a block of land might be, or a house and land in an established area might be. And they give great investment returns because of that high demand for that type of housing in that right area. So there's strong returns for a lot of those properties. And there's also a continuous improvement of that satellite city. Generally, they start off quite small, or they might establish, and over time investment in those areas builds and it grows, and you start seeing things like infrastructure and development. It just adds to the natural equity growth of a property in those areas. So it makes for a good place to invest. But I think the key is to get in early. So people need to find the satellite city when they know it's going to emerge or establish. An established satellite city is still a great place to invest. The earlier you get in, I guess, the better it is. That'd probably be my advice to a lot of people looking at that type of investment.
Well, given that's the case, Ali, what's the standout centre in the Sydney market for you?
Look, it has to be Parramatta. The hype at the moment in Sydney is about Parramatta. Parramatta for a long time has been slowly emerging as a satellite city, and has only in recent years become a formal second CBD to Sydney. So it's been established as and acknowledged that it will be the second CBD to Sydney, and New South Wales will operate with so Sydney will operate with the dual CBD status, and Parramatta is the second. So it's a great example of a satellite city. It's also recognised in the state government's plan for growing Sydney over the next 20 to 30 years, and the role of Parramatta is set to take charge and become more of an economic hub, I guess, for the central and western part of Sydney metropolitan area. So the success of it so far is looking promising. There's a lot of investment happening in Parramatta at the moment, and we're talking over $8 billion worth of development in recent times. Over $1 billion in government funding for transport and infrastructure has been brought into the city. The council of Parramatta has taken on board a lot of the investment and started promoting the city of Parramatta as a city. It's taken on a bit of a branding for the city and tried to promote it themselves to grow its status and its identity. As I said earlier, one of those key things is an established identity. And Parramatta is one of those great examples where the council's done a lot to do that. They've given it a brand, they've given it an identity that people can relate to. So I think with the record levels of investment that are being poured into the city, this is only the start, and what we're going to see over the next 10 to 20 years will basically just keep growing, and it'll become a true satellite city for Sydney. It's naturally going to grow over time because of its position being in the centre of the Sydney Basin. And the investment in building and infrastructure isn't just from the private sector, it's coming from the public sector as well, which is great. At the same time that we're getting housing, we're getting infrastructure, we're getting transport, we're getting services at the same time. So it's making way for a really good example of a satellite city that will work in Sydney, hopefully.
Ali, thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
That's okay, Kevin.